Of course, we like to think of ourselves as objective and truth-seeking people. So it's really helpful to have a community of people around us who can challenge us and point out those inconsistencies when they arise.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolske.
And I'm Rudy Salo.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a happy life. Our guest today, we have social scientist, author of the book Misguided, Matthew Facciani. Something that stood out to me about the title of this book, which we talked about at the very beginning, it's not titled Misinformation, because if we were to talk about misinformation, then we're just talking about something in the abstract, a thing, a definition. By naming this Misguided, he's letting us know that he's digging into the social psychology of why we buy into misinformation. And so something that's lovely is that he sets out a bunch of critical thinking terms and ways to spot when we have misinformation. And a lot of that has to do with confirmation bias. What did you like about this episode, Rudy?
There was a lot to like, and your question was wonderful. What's the difference between something being misguided as opposed to disinformation? Actually having that distinction to actually lay out the differences between the two sets it up for a very nice framework. It was academic. It was fun. We talked about how we can try to bring people together again, how to have better dialogue regarding politics and difficult issues. We even talked about a little bit about the very controversial FIFA call. We even brought in something as ridiculous as what had occurred before the United States men's team got absolutely destroyed by Belgium,
right.
Which, by the way, I'm very happy that we were at full strength because I feel like many conspiracies and many negative things could have happened. But I digress. We get into a lot into this podcast. It's a very fun one, very educational.
Yeah, and I had an aha moment in the middle of the episode because we were talking about how groups have become so divided. When we were talking about lockdown and the way people were responding to vaccines, you had these two distinct camps that were linked to political disposition and also a disposition about trust in medicine, trust in the government. Because everything was locked down, the people who were vaccinated, they generally had the same disposition or attitudes toward medicine, science, and politics, and they all got together. And then the people who were not vaccinated, they also shared this common denominator and attitude toward government and medicine, and then they were all together. So we literally weren't even sharing spaces. The way in which we've just, as a population, have this cultural wall because of algorithms and spaces, not sharing the same space literally, that we're even more divided. As Matthew says, everybody wants the truth. It's that everybody thinks that they have a way to get it or that they have it. So truth is the value, but we're not even speaking about the same way to unearth what makes something true. And then people are just mad at each other. Matthew has a good breakdown to figure out how, if they are in a bubble, if they're stuck in an algorithm, how do you question your beliefs? And I think the number one thing to do in critical thinking, this is something, of course, you would have to do as a lawyer as well, consider what is another way of looking at this. Just take a moment to consider, what if I am wrong? What is the alternative? And that is the fastest way where you can exercise your critical thinking skills. All right. And just a reminder, everybody, this is a listener-supported pod, and we have got some merch. So go to goodisinthedetails.com so that you can see all the things. I updated our website. You can get books from our guests. You can get these cool totes. And you can also go to Patreon to support the pod, extend the conversation. Patreon.com/goodisinthedetails. We're also on Instagram. You can check out the show notes for all the links. But now let's talk with podcaster, scholar, author, Matthew Facciani. Matthew, welcome to Good is in the Details. We're going to be talking about misinformation. Although I have to say the title of your book is Misguided. And I think that's a very interesting choice, that we're not just talking about misinformation. Wait. Okay, let's start there. Explain that word choice. Why misguided instead of misinformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all so much for having me on your show today. Yeah, we can jump into the kind of high level of how I think about what I do and what I study, because because it kind of captures beyond the word misinformation, beyond the topic of misinformation. The main thing I really study academically as a social scientist is, why do people believe what they believe? How do social forces guide us towards different beliefs? And the main thesis of my book is that as humans, we're very social creatures and we're motivated to connect with other people. And this makes us want to align with different groups and have these different identities. And that's great in many ways. However, sometimes those same social forces, the desire for community, to connect, to find meaning, can guide us towards processing information in a way that's not consistent with the best available evidence. So that could be misinformation. I view this as a way of how we're just these fundamentally social beings, and that can be helpful in many ways, but it can also lead us astray into believing things that are not true.
I see. So we're talking about the people, which would be misguided, as opposed to the thing itself, misinformation. Okay.
Yeah. Very focused on the people, the individual, the psychology.
I have always emphasized travel, even to my students in the classroom. Please travel, travel, travel. Because when you travel, then you get outside of the norm of your culture, and then you can become aware that there are other ways of being or other ways of looking at things. But of course, we don't all have the luxury of just picking up and traveling.
Right.
So I tell people, take a look at your junior high school photo when you were in the 7th grade. And I bet you thought you looked good. And if you can just take a look at that photo, then you can see the realm of influence. I had the Aquanet, the giant bangs, and I thought that that was fabulous. Rudy, I don't know what your 7th grade photo, you know what? We should find your 7th grade photo, and that should be an Instagram post. What do you think?
So in the 7th grade, I actually still remember getting one of the worst haircuts of my life.
Oh no.
I think it was around picture time. And then I think I realized in the 7th grade, one thing that you cannot be cheap with are haircuts and hairstylists. So I would not want that picture out there, but it did change my life. Is that helpful? Meaning I've been humble for a long time. I know I didn't look good. So I've been working my ass off every single year to improve myself.
Because that's
very apropos for the show. You know what I mean? So I've always I guess it's a self-esteem issue. We don't need to go there.
My massive bad haircut happened in the 5th grade. It scarred me. Okay. But at any rate, so this is one of the ways, is that we have to be aware that we're even involved in let's say, a network of bias and ways of thinking, but it's hard to even know that if everyone around you and the media you consume is saying the exact same thing. How do we reconcile that people care about the truth so much, and yet we're in a culture of misinformation?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, broadly, people do care about truth and accuracy. If you ask people, they'll say, yes, of course I care about that. However, that version of truth can look very different depending on how you view the world, what's important to you, what your values are, what information sources you consume. And also, if you have identities that are pushing you to process information in a certain way, that may feel like the truth, but maybe you're not evaluating information as objectively as you can, or maybe the meaning and the values and the importance of certain identities kind of override your concern for accuracy. You're more concerned about going along and connecting with your community, maybe even on a unconscious level that can, again, still feel like you're doing what is truthful, but because you're pushed by these social biases to conform or get along with your social group, you may believe things that are not true.
Let's do the most basic breakdown. How do we know when we're confronted with a bias, or that we are thinking in terms of a confirmation bias? What's the tell? What's the difference between bias and opinion, for instance?
You could think of it as the amount of weight you place on evaluating a claim. If you're only paying attention to things that make your side look good and ignoring the things that make it look bad, for example, that could be a bias. If you're looking at like different news coverage of different events, sometimes someone might say something that's mostly true, but it's presented in a way that maybe focuses on a political candidate that they like. Maybe they only focus on the good things, downplay some of the bad things. Opinion and biases are connected. It's a way of seeing the world that isn't always kind of a binary true versus not true, but just what we focus on and what we pay attention to. To answer your other question, how do we know that we're doing this? I think one of the best ways is still to try and connect with people who see the world differently than we do, because they are going to be able to call out those biases more accurately and more effectively than if we just try to think internally. Because of course we like to think of ourselves as objective and truth-seeking people. So it's really helpful to have a community of people around us who can challenge us and point out those inconsistencies when they arise.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important to have a partner, a spouse, a wife that challenges you. What about, like, not trying to go off on a tangent here, but I've actually seen this like unfold where people have gone in deeper, further into their camp because they have that relative or they have that friend that no matter what they say, all they do is challenge them, right? They could be saying, it's a clear sky, but then there's that person, there's that relative that's like, no, it's not. You don't see, and like, I do think it's really important to have people around that challenge you, but what do you do when you have that person that's around you frequently, whether it's a relative or anything like that, that's like, you can never agree? Because I could see the case where when you constantly have strife with somebody and they're always challenging you, you'll double down on your beliefs. Has that come up in any of your studies? Because I know you do psychology and you study a lot of different aspects of it. Just like drinking, just like everything else, everything in moderation, meaning you can't always have that person always challenge everything that you say.
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. One, yes, if you're having an unpleasant interaction with someone, it's going to make productive dialogue much more challenging. And that's something that I speak about in my own work. If someone's like disparaging you and attacking you, you're not going to be as open to information. Just psychologically, like we feel an emotion, we kind of get defensive and we're not processing the information as objectively as we can. So that's why there's this whole literature on effective communication and having compassionate dialogue and having a way to at least reduce that defensiveness. And that's what I talk about for productive dialogue. I never frame it in ways of how do you change someone's mind. I frame it in how do I at least present my perspective in a way that has the highest odds of being heard by the other person? How do I reduce those defensive biases so they at least listen and don't immediately reject it? So if someone's like attacking you or being really obnoxious, then yes, in order to have any kind of dialogue or perspective taking, if they're constantly doing that, then you may not be motivated to listen to them or think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, even if they're right, even if you're like dead wrong.
Right.
Like, and that's where, like, even in my own personal life or even just like everything, there are certain people I have this kind of relationship with, and I can't even begin to listen to their side of it just because of the history and the animosity of things. So I guess I'm asking for some free psychological therapy here. I'm just trying, how do you like dial that down? I guess maybe you have a conversation about effective dialogue or something, or just say, hey, look, like you can't always disagree with me. Can we just find some common ground and then go from there?
Yeah, I mean, again, it really depends on the individual relationship and the history. I mean, yeah, if you have a history of negative experiences with a person, it's going to be much more challenging because there's all that baggage there. I also think some people do have a more contrarian identity. That's, we talk about identities, I often talk about political identities because they're just easy to study and they explain a lot. But you could think about like personalities as different identities or hobbies or things we care about. There's all sorts of things that are identities. And if you like to be someone who is always challenging other people and you believe you have maybe secret knowledge that makes you feel better than others, then you might just be a very disagreeable person. In that particular case, it's going to be very challenging to have productive dialogue if someone really enjoys the act of disagreement.
You nailed it. What do you do with those people? What if you're related to those people? What if you work with those people? What if you're married to those people? Like, what do you do, Matthew?
I mean, that's tough, depending on the situation.
The empathy. Yeah, what you're saying is that the empathy, I think what's happening, Rudy, and maybe Matthew, you can tell me, I remember around Thanksgiving, just this past year, there was this op-ed piece that caused this big uproar. Even, I think Oprah Winfrey on her podcast was talking about families that are disconnected or adult children who are no longer going to be around their family and making this choice. And around Thanksgiving, there was this op-ed about just put stuff to the side and go be with your family. And what Rudy's describing is actually happening where people are no longer family members. What they're doing now, not the empathy, not the compassion, distanced. We're no longer related. I'm thinking about this because your book reminded me of the sociologist, Professor Fong, who had been a guest on our show, talked about how COVID got rid of the public square. So when everybody is retreated into their home and they're only connecting online, especially in Southern California, where it's so diverse, you lose access to people who are different from you, maybe speak a different language, look different, that are at the grocery store, right? Or just at work, at the mall. You lose access to the people who are different and are now just stuck at home and will be more susceptible to stereotypes or misinformation. The COVID vaccine, which is a big part of your book, divided because I know, and Rudy, you were like this too. One once the vaccine happened or it was safe, we would still wear the masks and hang out with the other people who had the vaccines, which means that the people who weren't vaccinated didn't come to the little gathering to go sit outside. The people who weren't vaccinated were going and hanging out with the other people who weren't vaccinated. And so now you've got this separation of social groups, and they have a common denominator for them to even put together an outside dinner, for instance. They're not interacting at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an accelerant to this
Yes.
fracturing. And especially with the mask, it's an identity marker that's visual too. So it's like there's all these things that kind of accelerate these existing forces. And I think you touched on a few things there. One, this connection or lack of connection people have found over time from differing politics or the pandemic or just the way our society is structured does connect to susceptibility to misinformation because we're isolating ourselves further and further in these communities that agree with us. And we're not getting that exposure to differing viewpoints or differing connections. And this maps onto this idea of identity complexity. If you have lots of identities that are not overlapping with each other, in conflict with each other sometimes even, that's having this more complex nature of how your identities and how they relate to each other. And the opposite of that is if all of your identities completely overlap and they all align. And when that happens, you're more likely to believe misinformation or more vulnerable to it because you are deriving so much of those meanings and that self-esteem that is connected to these identities that they're all in one kind of homogenous bubble. So the way I think about identities, to back up a little bit, identities are sets of meanings for how we view the world. We feel good whenever we act in ways that are consistent with those meanings. Many times this is benign, or even good. Like if you're a parent, maybe you want to be good to your children because that's a meaning associated with being a parent. But let's say you have a political identity, you really care about this political identity, and maybe this political identity is saying, okay, we don't like this group, or to be part of our group, you have to believe this certain thing, and maybe that's not connected to the best available evidence. Now imagine that meaning is also overlapping with your religious identity or all of your friendship identities, your community identities. And now let's say in this particular example, 100% of the meanings that you care about are all converging and all sharing agreement. Now when you encounter information that challenges that, it feels like a complete overall sense of attack on your overall sense of self. So you're extremely motivated to not process that information as objectively as possible. But if you have identities that are very spread out, they're more complex, they're not completely overlapping with each other, then whenever you encounter some information that challenges, let's say, your political identity, it's not attacking your overall sense of self. It doesn't feel like there's 100% personal attack of who you are and how you derive meaning in the world. So you're much more likely to process it in a more objective way. And then to do that kind of connects back to your original point. You have to meet lots of different people. You have to be in spaces where you're thinking about lots of different things. And if we're not able to do that, then people don't develop these complex identity maps.
That is really helpful. Why people hold on to things that even when offered some sort of evidence or data, that it's dismissed because it's not about the information so much. It's about you don't want to let go of who you are.
The ability to be in different spaces over time, I think, is really important. Even if you are in a space that's maybe a little bit more homogenous today, if you at least had the trajectory of like, okay, I've been in different spaces, I've been religious, non-religious, liberal, conservative, so I can kind of see where people are coming from, that I think allows you to have more productive dialogue and engage in perspective taking that's a little bit easier. Maybe also allows you to be a little bit more humble on what you know and don't know, since you changed your mind so much already. So you're a little bit inherent bias to being more open, since you've already been like, oh, well, I already changed my whole worldview before, so maybe I don't know everything.
Is our identity what we have decided, or is it what has been decided for us? So, for example, I'm from Southern California. When I go outside of Southern California, if I mention that that's where I'm from, it is part of my identity, but there might be something that's added to that by whoever I'm interacting with. Their idea of what Southern California is then factored into the way that they act toward me, and then that influences the way I am understanding what this identity means, or the identity of being a woman. Then I've got this identity, but then other people will treat me in a particular way because they have a particular understanding of what a woman is. How much does that influence what it means to have this identity? In other words, does the world impose and then we end up acting in according to what we think our identity is supposed to be?
Yeah, I think it's definitely both. Our identities can be pushed onto us to be more salient or important, depending on how people react to us. especially if you're in a position where, let's say, you're a woman studying, mathematics or physics when you're in the minority, then maybe that's going to be more salient than if you're a woman in other fields where it's not as pushed, or vice versa. If you're a man studying being like a male nurse, for example, maybe that is more, your gender is more salient then. So I think that is one way. Like, what context do we exist in? How are people treating us? If we're constantly being treated differently because gender, race, religion, then that may be more something that we think about more. And if we think about it more and it's how we see ourselves more, that it could be more impactful. But then there's also a distinction between how salient it is in our mind and how much we actually care about it. Maybe we don't want to constantly be reminded that we're different, but yet other people are forcing that to us. So it's going to change how we view ourselves. There's still going to be, it could create a different identity of people are always bothering me and I don't like that. And maybe I want to change the world so it doesn't happen as much in that way. There's all sorts of forces that are affecting us. And that's why, again, I've been so interested in this topic, because these are completely like in behavioral social forces that really influence how we process information on a lower level even.
I remember something that always stuck with me. It was letters that were published between Hannah Arendt and Karl Jaspers. And Karl Jaspers told her, it was when she was in Germany, you're a German citizen, don't worry. When things were getting bad, you're a German citizen, don't worry. And Hannah Arendt wasn't of a religious foundation, ethnically Jewish. And she wrote back in her letter, and this is the only line that I remember because it stood out to me, but everyone can see that I am not. And so she came to the United States. That is what I'm thinking of, an example of what happens when the world imposes an identity to you. Well, in another way, like the 7th grade school photo. You think you look good. You don't realize that there's some other way to be. You're in the fashion, but you, looking back, realize that you were acting in accord with what everybody said was good, which means that if we can see that, then we can be reflective about where we are right now. Because in 100 years, somebody's going to look back, or history's going to look back, and they're going to say, they did what? We're not aware of it. In the same way, we can look back 50 years ago or 100 years ago and say, they did what? What were they thinking? They thought that was a good idea, whether it's fashion, engineering, or medicine, or politics. So we have to know that right now, we are doing something stupid, that the future civilization is going to look back. So how do we even come to terms to figure out what our crazy is?
Yeah, that's a great point. We definitely have these kind of cultural, societal biases. It's really hard to know if everyone's thinking the same way. Again, psychologically, they're reaffirming each other, saying, hey, you're doing everything right. There's nothing you have to worry about. And then just psychologically, we're not going to reflect on that because there's no incentive, there's no motivation to do so. Trying to at least push ourselves with at least thinking about and speaking with people who think differently than us today is one good step. It's not going to overcome all of our biases, because even as a human civilization, yeah, I agree with you. In 100 years, there'll probably be things that people look back on and be like, humans did what at this time? And no one really even knew that was the right thing, or we didn't think about it enough, or it was, pushed to our unconscious too much. The remedy for that is not a perfect remedy, but it speaks to what we covered earlier of trying to reflect on different times in our lives where we did update our beliefs or things that we were wrong about, and then having people in our lives to help us remind ourselves that happened, because it's easy to just not pay attention to that. Even if we did change religions, change politics, we were wildly wrong about something and then changed our beliefs, maybe we're not always wanting to reflect on that. It's not maybe the most comfortable feeling, but I think it's necessary if we care about seeking out evidence or truth as best we can.
I wonder if it's the size of the audience. For example, if Rudy and I are having a conversation and I say something that's incorrect and he points it out, not that big of a deal. We're just like having a beer or something. If the crowd gets bigger, maybe it's a party of 5, I'll self-correct. But if I have 1 million followers on social media and I have said something that's incorrect, that threshold of shame or embarrassment or identity changes. Right. Is that relevant?
I think so. When we think about interpersonal dialogue and reflections, yeah, especially with social media, there's so many incentives to process information and speak differently. I jokingly posted this a few weeks ago, unethical ways to build a large social media audience. One of the biggest ones is pick one group, you constantly affirm that particular in-group, and then attack a group that group doesn't like. And then you do all the sensationalism and all the stuff that goes along with that. But to your point, if you are constantly getting feedback from this in-group membership of you're actually correct and what you said was not a problem, then you might be more motivated to think that way yourself. Even if the other side was correct and they were pointing out something you did wrong, you may just not think about it. And you see this all the time. I mean, it's wild to watch this unfold where where someone will just say something wrong that's objectively untrue, but only people on their opposing political camp will call them out on it. And they can just be like, oh, those people just don't like me, so that's why they're attacking me. And maybe you don't ever really update your belief there because you're just so focused on, I only cared about what this particular group says. That's going to make me not reflect on my beliefs more. However, if you're in a one-on-one situation where maybe someone is disagreeing with you and you don't have that audience of trying to posture of affirming your in-group, maybe you'll be more likely to listen to them. And it doesn't mean you'll change your mind, but I think you're at least going to reduce those defensive biases that I spoke about earlier. Because again, if you're really motivated to keep protecting your identity, your community, it's almost automatic that you reject the criticism or different points of view from someone online, especially online where you have this kind of anonymous component. It's not this human interaction.
With the vaccines and with medicine and health influencers, I see a lot of forces of this idea of something is easier and this anti-intellectualism, the whole do your own research. You have that in your book, and I definitely want to talk about what that means. But I guess I can get it a little bit more because I, for example, don't have any background in medicine. So I am putting faith in my doctor. I'm yielding to my physician for that, but I don't have access. But I could see how misinformation could spread with that. However, I was really surprised by the subject of tariffs because that doesn't require a medical degree or anything like anything that's kind of special, but the alignment with the rightness or wrongness and the efficacy of tariffs was a huge divide that felt like as big as the vaccines when that's a numbers or a definition game.
Yeah, because in the United States, we have this very polarizing political system where, if Donald Trump says anything, then it's going to be very politicized, polarizing. It's just going to be difficult to have a conversation about it. So, tariffs or whatever. Yeah.
Not all tariffs are the same. It was either they're good or bad, and that was the end of the conversation.
Right. And that, again, that speaks to a broader political climate, especially online, where there's not a motivation to have any sort of nuanced conversation about it. One, like the algorithm is not going to reward thoughtful, nuanced points about tariffs or any issue. So you're only seeing the most extreme takes on it online. And that's true of any topic. But two, it's like, what motivation do you have if your political group doesn't like this guy? You're saying, oh, maybe there's a good point. Maybe not even with tariffs, just in general. What motivation do we have to speak about any positive points that someone on our opposing political group has?
I have to go in on that point because I think he brought up a good one. Matthew, the danger of possibly agreeing with the quote unquote other side's point. Let's say they are doing something or they are making a movement in a positive direction. In this polarized world, left, right, going into election cycles, I think things are going to get crazier as we come to November. And you're online or you're at Thanksgiving, right? And one side of your family is X, one side of your family is Y. The danger of agreeing with something that the quote unquote other side is doing, like, oh no, wait a minute, on that point, I actually agree with. Maybe my team doesn't, but me morally, me fiscally, me, whatever it is, whatever your reasoning for agreeing with them, I do feel like these days it's even vitally more important that people speak up, have the courage to agree with something that the other side is doing, because it's impossible to say, well, everything that team, the Republicans or the Democrats, is doing is wrong. That's an actual impossibility because we're all human beings. B, like in general, I think we all want the better of our country and the better of humanity in general. Okay, I'm just gonna put it out there. But I think it's even more important, either online or with your group of friends, that if there is something that the other side is doing that you can agree with, that actually really helps to solidify dialogue. It actually helps to bring people, quote unquote, into the middle. It actually helps people to see eye to eye and get back to the table so they can start to dialogue maybe about those things where you don't agree with. Like finding that common middle ground, no matter how small or how big, is so important in the United States and even in the world today. That would be the one thing that I would encourage. However, it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it? Because you don't ever want to say you agree with anything that the Trump administration is doing or the Biden administration is doing, right? Oh no, that's against my team. I'm going to lose my friends. I'm going to lose my social media followers, et cetera, et cetera. You can go down that road. That courage is incredibly important today. How do we get people to do that more and explain to them how vital we need that today in our country?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I do agree. It's hard because so much of this is context dependent. Like, what's the actual conversation about? Like, individually, yes, if we can find common ground with someone, it's going to help accelerate productive dialogue. It doesn't even have to be about policy. It can be things like you both like the same sports team or movies or music. I mean, this
I
is
have
like,
one. I have one
yeah,
really quick. I'm going to
yeah,
interrupt you.
yeah.
Which American is against Donald Trump calling up the FIFA guy and saying, "Hey, that red card was bullshit. That should have been a yellow card. He should be able to play tonight." Like, I'm sorry, but that should have been. I'm just trying to even
Rudy, you're doing
my
your part, and I love it.
yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to be like, because there were some conversations and stuff over July 4th, and then when we found out, it was like, oh well, hey, at least he did that. That was really good. Hey, that's
Mhm.
really small. How about we pause when even when there was those minor things? Or is the danger that if you ever applause anything, even as small as the red card, yellow card thing, that all of a sudden that guy's an asshole, that guy's a racist, that guy hates transgender rights, that guy hates this, that guy, like you automatically get thrown into this category if you agree with something even that small. That's the danger today. Maybe that's extreme, but I've seen that happen. If you agree with anything on the other side, you could be painted like you're an extremist. That's the problem.
I mean, I think it speaks to how social media is constructed and the incentive structures around communicating on social media. You're going to get more likes on your post if you say something like you just said. If someone says, well, Donald Trump had a good point here, and you're on the other side, or vice versa, just anytime you can call out the other side as not being pure or good, your own side is like, yeah, like we're reaffirming our identities and we're going to give ourselves support. And that's on the fringes of people who think like that. But on social media, it rewards this kind of extremism, this binary thinking. And the algorithm then rewards that kind of conflict and sensationalism and extremist posturing. So if you're only interacting with people politically online, you get a very skewed presentation of what people think. Because if I imagine, I haven't had this particular conversation about the red card, yellow card, but I bet you'd have very different conversation with people, liberals and conservatives, if you were just maybe all watching the game together and be like, oh, I'm glad that Trump said this thing. I think it would be a different reaction, I would guess. That'd be my hypothesis, than if you were to post the same thing on social media where there's an incentive to say, oh, I have to attack this person because I'm going to get likes for that. And you're going to get likes for it.
You nailed it. It's the worry about the likes, the worry about how you present online. Social media has created this whole new identity. You are who you are with your family and your friends. You are who you are at work, and then you are who you are online. The danger is people perhaps don't think that there are consequences to who you are presenting to be online. Just because you have freedom of speech, it doesn't mean that they don't come with consequences. You read the First Amendment and you think, oh, that applies to the social media company. Oh, that applies to my job, my corporation. I have freedom of speech. No. First Amendment applies to the government. It doesn't apply to corporations. It doesn't apply to social media companies. It doesn't mean that there's not ramifications for you posting something online. Yeah, Rudy, obvious. No, I don't think so. Because a lot of people are losing their jobs because they're a member of a team, or they're saying something, or they're not getting promoted, or something's going on. Sure, you can make a living by having followers. You can make a living and all that, but you can also lose your living. You can also lose your family and friends by who you are online. And I think that's just vitally important for students, for people to think before they post. Critically think about the consequences. Where can this go? What's the risk? How could this be interpreted before they post anything at all?
That point in particular is certainly a strong one. Like, I'm pretty active on social media. The main platforms I use are Threads and Blue Sky. But anytime I post something, I always try to think, would I be okay if everyone on the planet saw this and judged me for it? And that's like my prompt before I hit okay. Usually I try to be pretty measured, and I think it helps because I'm always thinking that.
What do you think about the rise of the trad wife phenomenon? Because that is something that is spreading, and this is kind of like what Rudy was saying. Rudy, I'm going to agree with you. There's this nugget of truth, of a shared value in the joy of partnership at home, working together, a division of chores. Hey, this is your strength, this is my strength. Even in preparing a meal. That is something that I enjoy doing. I actually kind of enjoy cleaning too, because it's, when everyone's gone and it's like, oh, it's my free time. I'm going to play the podcast or an audiobook. It's one of the ways that I think when I'm organizing and I'm cleaning. Now, I also identify, right, as a feminist. Then you've got the tradwife phenomenon that is taking these things that I also enjoy, but is taking it to a level saying that if I am a feminist, for instance, have a career, a PhD, that these things are incompatible, that I can't be these things. This growth of the tradwife phenomenon is because they're latching on to something that can be a shared joy across identities, but then narrowing the framework of what is allowed as you go further. The pipeline, if you will. The pipeline starts out broad enough to catch a bunch of people, and then it gets to be more and more exclusive. What role is the economics? Like the same thing with the health and the vaccines and the natural stuff. It's more expensive to see a physician. It's more expensive to have healthcare. You can resent the elite and find a cheaper option with this natural way. What's going on with the tradwife phenomenon then? What's the impetus?
That's what I was thinking, the economics. When I see this stuff, I
Okay.
think it speaks to the economic situation of Gen Z and millennials at the moment, where things are not going well economically for most Gen Z millennials. You're presented with something different, something new. It's like, well, work sucks. You're going to be underpaid. It's going to be stressful. But here's this other alternative where you stay home and you cook and clean, and you don't have to worry about being laid off, your wages cut or something like that. It's like, oh, that's economic frustrations that are being weaponized to promote something that's going to be successful in this algorithm.
So the motive to make this kind of content would be economic. I mean, they're making tons and tons of money.
Yeah, so I'm speaking of the broader economics, but
So,
then their perspective, they make a ton of money doing it too.
okay, yeah. So they're making a lot of money, but I'm wondering, why is it the reason why, let's say, a young man or a young woman would buy into it? So they're not benefiting from the business side of this content. So why are they drawn into it? And is it in part because it's a rejection of how uncomfortable in economic conditions right now that this seems like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to lean into my femininity. I don't have to worry about going to college. I don't have to worry about paying the bill. I'm going to lean into my femininity. All I have to do is be attractive and find somebody who will provide and pay for everything. If we had a different economic climate right now, would the tradwife phenomenon be working?
I don't think so.
Or if we had healthcare for everybody had access to it, no problem whatsoever, would we have this natural stuff on the side, supplements and all that?
I don't think so. And it's an interesting question. And there's some data that kind of touches on that. And as far as the conflation of the healthcare system, I think is something that is something you will see a lot of, like doctors being biased. But really the frustration is with insurance companies, for example. And if you don't know, like I'm in a position where I know a lot of physicians personally, more familiar with that world and what they go through. So I kind of see this delineation between the limits of what they can do and what they can't do, how that connects to insurance and how separate they are. Like they're just as frustrated by insurance companies as the patients are. But if you don't know a lot of physicians, if you don't have that experience of knowing what they go through and what their thoughts are, it's easy to conflate it all as the healthcare system and how you're frustrated with that system. And then you could say, well, this system's not working for me, so I'm going to go outside of that system and seek out people, especially people who are speaking directly to my concerns. And this is really where the wellness world thrives and does so well, is they can sell the ideas of empowerment in a way that institutional evidence-based medicine cannot, at least in the current moment. It's so empowering to say, you can take control of your body, your health. You can do this regimen of taking X amount of supplements, my online course, whatever. And it makes you feel like you're doing something. You have control. Whereas if you go to the doctor, a traditional evidence-based physician, they might say, I don't know the answer and we don't have the best available data. And maybe all you can do is do this really complex thing that you may not want to do. That doesn't sound as good. And it might be really expensive. There's like this kind of disadvantage in a system where our healthcare is so expensive, where this breeding ground for people to take advantage of that.
Okay, I said that we would lean into AI. I don't know totally how I feel. As a professor, I'm incredibly frustrated when it's obvious that my students are handing in stuff that they did not write. I mean,
Yeah.
it's obvious. The habit now of outsourcing thinking
Right.
is going to make the possibility of thinking infinitely more difficult. You can't outsource thinking, I tell them, but they don't get it. Just like I can't outsource exercise. Even though I have a vehicle that can transport me, I still need to exercise. Nobody can do it for me. So on that way, it bothers me. But on the other hand, when people are talking about things that are false and you plug that into AI cannot make the case that the earth is flat, for instance, because it's working with the existing body of knowledge. So how do we work around media literacy, what AI can do? Where is it problematic? That's a really big question for the end. Okay, what do you see going on with AI and this issue of identities and misguided and misinformation?
Yeah, I think it accelerates a lot of the issues and concerns I already had with social media and our digital ecosystem. Social media allows us to find people who agree with us, that validate our identities, and become more entrenched in our camps. AI can do that and scale that up. There's a few different, I mean, there's lots of things we can dive into, but one thing is the scale of bots is much more sophisticated now. Instead of like a clunky bot that's kind of speaking in a different language, not very well, it can now write very persuasively and very cogently in a way that it couldn't just a few years ago. And then, of course, fake videos, fake audio. Another huge challenge is now navigating this landscape of deep fakes where people don't know what's true or false, so they just kind of doubt everything. So this lack of trust that's spreading is another issue. Bad actors can take advantage of AI and spread lots of disinformation. There's lots of challenges. It can also be used for positives. I think AI in that particular world, the media literacy world, there's been some studies now showing that it can be used to teach media literacy effectively. So like some of the research I used to do was develop these media literacy games where you teach people media literacy skills through an online game. And now AI kind of adds an interactive component to that. It's easy technically to develop, or easier technically to develop. So we can kind of have these more interactive tools that can be created with these AI agents that are accessible now. So that's one way. And it also track the information landscape quicker. I mean, when I think about artificial intelligence, it's been around for so long. We think about like machine learning and basically regressions of regressions to analyze big data sets. And now it's just a lot more accessible and scalable. So being mindful of it, I think is important. And then there's the whole like cognitive offloading topic that you mentioned. And that's a really big challenge with education. I keep having this despair of like what happened to the generation of students in the last 5 years. Like they really got the short end of the stick. They had COVID, and
Yes,
then
absolutely.
immediately after COVID, they had ChatGPT and these AI agents being dumped onto the world without any kind of plan or structure on how to teach AI literacy effectively. So a lot of young people really got a negative education experience. And we see this in the test scores being lower, the standardized test scores actually being lower for the first time, I think, ever. We see this like decline. So, we have teachers and professors going back to paper tests and oral
That's what I'm
exams.
doing.
I know people are doing this in different countries and across the United States. I think right now that's our best option since we didn't really have structure, because ideally you'd like work with AI and, all this stuff and have guardrails and structure. And we don't have that. So we're just trying to like do what we can to make sure people are still learning stuff. I think that does require using methods that allow people to use their brains and develop new neural connections.
It's so important, that education, because when we are getting rid of reading, for instance, or reading the novel in elementary school and then high school and just picking little snippets, people are not even reading that. And then by the time I see them, there are students who can remember maybe one book that they've read from cover to cover. I mean, you're losing everything. You're losing point of view, the reality that people see the world differently, and that can be interesting. It's not always interesting, but it can be. And that disposition, like reading enables that disposition of curiosity and humility, because you have people like in the vein of Socrates, they hear something that is new that they didn't know and they light up, or maybe they're thankful for being corrected so that they don't make an ass out of themselves later. And then there are people who have not been exposed to the joy of learning about new things. And so then they double down and then they're angry. They go further and further away. And then that buildup when they're adults, it's my way or the highway. Screw this. I'm not going to listen to my doctor. What did they know? So-called experts. I think putting literature back, maybe even Latin or a second language, would make a world of difference to the underscoring psychology behind the anger and the clickbait and the misinformation. That's my solution. Get the kids reading novels again.
For sure. I'm totally down with that. Gwen, my wife, came up with a brilliant idea, reading time, where the family must read a physical book for 30 minutes every single night. And it was funny. The first time I was able to do it, because I was working late, my wife said, well, I'm going to go grab my Kindle. And I'm like, no, dude. No, you're going to go grab a book from our bookshelf that I've bought you, and you're going to read a physical book. You're going to sit here and show the kids to do that. And she was like, oh, okay. And she started reading a book that she hadn't read in a while, and trying to get it away from the digital and the physical. So yes, I think the reading is vitally important, and it's got to be away from online. Can I take one little different approach on the AI? Matthew, you are an educator. Gwen, you're an educator. There's a lot of reports coming out. I first posted about it in April on our Good is in the Details Substack, and I'm writing another post about it. Can we talk about AI companies hiring philosophers? And are you going to be touting this coming this school year? Are you guys going to be walking in there with like balloons?
I'm putting it on
saying,
a shirt. I'm putting on a hat. I'm walking around everywhere.
No, really. No, I'm serious about it. Are you expecting a flood of philosophy students? Are you how are you going to be promoting this? Do you think this is long term, or do you think the AI companies are just going to use and abuse philosophers, train their AI as to how to ask questions that never can be answered, which is pretty much a philosophy major?
We got sociology too.
Literally no reaction there. But seriously, I want to hear both of your reactions to the fact that some federal labor statistics came out and said there are more unemployed computer science / coders than there are philosophers. Is it a positive thing for our future that it could be the quote unquote return of the humanities, return to reading? Is there hope, or is this just a flash in the pan?
I think it's going to happen, but I want to clarify, Matthew, you studied neuroscience, sociology, and psychology, correct?
Yeah.
He's on all the social sciences. You know what? I think the same reason why I gave that example of I can't outsource exercise, even though I have the vehicle, thinking is fun. It doesn't sound fun because we're associating it with like the terribly uncomfortable desk in a room where it can rival the aesthetic of the DMV. So we think about thinking in those terms, but actually anytime like you're doing a puzzle, or you've got a mystery, or you go to the movies, or you go to a concert, as far as art, like that's a form of thinking, the way that the music moves you. Thinking is harder, but it's fun. In the same way, like, with athleticism, I mean, games don't really make any sense. You can do video games, but it's also a lot of fun to go out and just play basketball or tennis or, whatever it is you're doing. And it's also good for you. It's healthier for you. In the same way, fast food is not really gonna work. It might satisfy you for a second, and then you live with regret for the next day. We all know that making a meal and sitting with family is better, but every once in a while, maybe we'll do the drive-through. But we realize that it's not about just fuel. It's a whole experience. And I think thinking is going to have the same comeback. And it's important for all of these different companies, because who's going to write the next Netflix binge or the music in the car or
Good one.
What say you?
I do agree that the humanities are having a comeback. Whether or not that's cyclical or long-term remains to be seen. But you're right, like the way these LLMs, the large language models, these prediction token machines, where it's really hard for them to develop taste or creativity in a way that us humans like, because they are not operating the same way. And they're just trying to find the next word that makes sense. You kind of see what they're creating as far as the humanities side of it. It's not very good stuff. The creativity isn't there. I don't know if it can be in the way they're currently constructed. Maybe that's a better question for a computer scientist, philosopher, hybrid person. I do agree with that. There's the kind of a limitation there that we're already seeing. Like you can see really impressive technically stuff. Like people can make a video game from scratch with like a couple prompts, but it's not going to be that fun of a video game. It's just going to be kind of a clone of something that someone already did. So the technical aspect, you don't need to know a lot of code to make something now. And that's why junior level, entry level CS majors are having trouble trouble finding work because, yeah, like it's tough to get someone in that particular space given that we have these technical capabilities. But beyond that initial like entry level position, you still need someone overseeing the code and organizing a code and thinking about it. I do think communities are going to have a comeback. We're seeing that right now. It remains to be seen like if there's always going to be a cycle of boom and bust, though. I think that's a trend throughout our civilization, throughout history, where we have these just cycles of instead of like having a more sustained, maintained, safe process, we kind of alternate wildly sometimes. And maybe that's something inherent about being like very adaptable creatures. I don't know. As far as AI, it's certainly we're investing in it. It's not going away anytime soon. And I think it's helpful to be aware of how it can be used broadly, how it can be used within our own lives, and also to teach people the limitations of it so they don't get misled as well. And that kind of speaks to this broader AI literacy importance.
Amen. Or that's what Rudy always says. Amen. See, I picked up. See, when you hang out with somebody, then you pick up their same language. Next thing you know, Rudy's going to take a philosophy class. All right. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope when people listen, they not only get your book, they investigate their own beliefs and bias and maybe ask the question, is there another way of looking at this?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's great talking to you both.
Thanks, Matthew.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolske and Rudy Salo. If this episode is making you think about philosophy a little bit more, go on over to Patreon where you can do a deep dive into philosophical ideas and book recommendations and support the pod. And if you're interested in starting your own podcast, I have got some links in the show notes for podcast resources. And if this episode resonated with you, reach out to us. Instagram, Good is in the Details Pod, or our website, goodisinthedetails.com. And if you're really loving the show, please leave a rating or a review. It helps the podcast so much to reach a bigger audience and continue this work in public philosophy. Okay, until next time, bye.